All right, good evening, everybody. It is 6 p.m. on November 20th, 2024, and I would like to call the McMinnville Special Called Budget Committee Work Session to order and turn the mic over to Jeff Towery, our city manager, to introduce the topic and present.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the Budget Committee. First of all, I want to thank Crystal Woolridge for pulling together the staff report and apologize for at least one typo that I missed in the memo. We got the year of the election wrong. We're wishing it happened a year early, I guess, when we wrote that. I was focused more on the budget data and missed that piece. So obviously May of 23 was the election for the fire district. Want to make a couple of notes. All of the budget graphs that are in the memo do not anticipate any significant capital investments or major maintenance projects in the budget. It is pretty nominal in terms of those one-time costs. And so most of the costs you see represented in the graphs are operational for the city's general fund. Second, you know that we had significant one-time costs associated with the transition from the city fire department to the McMinnville Fire District. Those one-time costs are no longer built into the budget because we had to draw down the reserve in part to be able to accommodate that in the last fiscal year planning. We simply rolled that one-time money into the reserve. And so the graphs here don't represent any of that money being significantly available for operations, but it did rebuild the reserve to at or near the 2-month operating target that the council adopted a few years ago. That's also one of the reasons that there is almost an immediate deficit, because we're not applying any of that one-time cost to ongoing costs. And Adam, I think that answers the bulk of the question that you'd asked me earlier. Once I'm done with the presentation, if there's more about that, feel free to let me know. Just also note that the carrying costs estimated are really based on our most recent year, where we saw some lowering inflation, and our carrying costs still increased by about 5%. Our revenues, as is our typical, tend to increase at about 3%. We saw a 3% increase in assessed value in the current year, which was right about what we budgeted. So we were conservative, assuming those increases moving forward. We showed you 3 graphs, one that showed the balance between operating expenses and revenues, and either the surplus or the deficit if the property tax levy remains at the $4.02 that it is right now. Another 4-year forecast for an additional 50 cents, and then a similar forecast if the levy were increased to the full $5.02 currently allowed. The conversation tonight is for you to ask any questions that you have about the staff report, and for us to gather some consensus from you on the levy amount that we should consider as we put together a proposed budget that will be processed in the spring, like every single year. Crystal, do you have anything to add? Did I miss anything?
No, you've got it covered.
That is the end of my report. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have, and look forward to either questions and ultimately some consensus from you tonight.
And Commissioner Hart?
Jeff, a few questions. And it's pretty clear. I'll preface my questions by hoping that everyone out there in the city understand the effect of the 3% limit on assessed value, and how that is the driving force behind our deficit and deficit in so many other public entities. I do have some, and so that caused us, or the council, I should say, to look for other revenue sources, including the city services charge, which we all know about. But there are some other expenses that I'm concerned about as well. One is and I don't have the knowledge that council members have, the stormwater fee. When is that slated to go into effect, or what is the status of that?
So the stormwater utility work has been underway. There have been no operational fees or systems development charges established at this point. If at some point the council does approve either systems development charges and or operational fees for stormwater, it will be set up as a separate utility, much like wastewater is set up as a utility. Probably the most significant noticeable budget impact would be that some of the costs for street sweeping and parking lot sweeping that are currently borne either by the street fund or the general fund could be supported by a stormwater utility if there was a revenue stream, but that's not contemplated to happen in the coming year. So there's nothing in these budget forecasts that assume a stormwater utility or any revenue associated with stormwater.
Okay, and then also in future possible expenses would be the possible bond levy for the new facilities that we all hope for. And my understanding is that would be about $54 a month for a typical house. Is that, am I correct in that?
I think you're pretty close. I think when we calculated the numbers, it was maybe $59 for a typical household. That assumes $152 million general obligation bond issue. It also would probably take about a year or so from the time that was approved by the voters before we would actually issue the bonds. So it would be 1 or 2 fiscal years before anybody would see an impact from those general obligation bonds from the time it was approved.
Would there be ongoing costs for, keeping the facilities going that would come out of the general fund?
Yes, as a matter of fact, and we had a work session last week where the park staff and our architectural consultant went over those operational costs. Our estimate right now is that presuming an open facility in 2028, our operational costs would increase by about $600,000 more than what they are now.
Okay, then I also want to be mindful that, we hope to be able to give you some direction, but there's obviously been or will be changes in leadership in the on the city council, and what we do. This is by way of comment. We can make a recommendation, but we cannot be in any way binding upon future political bodies, and so it's going to be up to you all who will be carrying forward, and those newcomers to these tables who will actually be making the decision in the spring.
Any additional comments or questions? Who'd like to go first?
Sorry, can I jump in with a question real quick? We will be seeing negotiations for the next police union contract start up, and that contract comes to an end at the end of this fiscal year, right? So
Yes, June 30th,
okay, and
2025.
do we have any idea, and I know this may be just more speculation because those negotiations have not begun, of what that fiscal impact could potentially look like for us, and has any of that already been taken into consideration when?
Yes, so we've made a couple of assumptions. We, as best we can, try to forecast consumer price index increases. That is a dodgy business, for lack of a better term. So we've made some assumptions about that. We know where our current employees are on their salary schedules, so we can forecast out step increases. We have estimates about what PERS increases will be over the next couple of bienniums, so we can forecast that as well. What we don't really know is where we sit with respect to the comparable market. We know that when we negotiated the current contract about 3 years ago, we were pretty close to the market for police officers. We were a little below the market for corporals and sergeants. And so if you look at the salary schedule in the current contract, you'll see that corporals and sergeants got a little bit higher bump. So when we approved the contract that's in place right now, that really got us to the market for all of those ranks. But we don't know what the market has done since then, and that would be part of a research and an ongoing negotiation process. But we have made some assumptions about increases that they're built into these base assumptions that you see on the graphs.
Okay. If memory serves, and I wasn't a part of any of those conversations, at the time that the police union contract was negotiated, it sticks in my mind that the union elected to focus on trying to get the amount of officers that we have grown, and may have given up some potential income or benefits in order to encourage the hiring of more officers. Is that correct?
Well, what we did do is we adjusted our salary scale for the market. And again, for most of our officers, there wasn't a market adjustment necessary because we were within the market. And as is typical with the bargaining unit and was typical with the fire union as well, is oftentimes second and third years of the contract would have a range for a CPI increase with a floor and a ceiling. So in this case, I think well, I know the ceiling was 5%. I think the floor was 2%. And so that means is the minimum COLA in a given year would be 2%. The maximum would be 5%. For the second and third year of the contract that we're in now, 1 year CPI was just under 5 and one it was over 5. And so the 24 increase was capped at 5%. I think CPI last February was around 6% or something like that. So there was a little bit of a delta between CPI and the range that was granted.
Okay. One last question in that line. Over the last, umpteen years, I think it's been more than 3, we've seen quite a few of our veteran officers end up leaving the force, I think, for a plethora of different reasons, for just general retirement, but then also moving on to possibly other work that's not police related. But then there's also the move to other agencies. Do we keep track of potentially like reasons for those veteran officers leaving the MACPD?
We try to do exit interviews with everyone who leaves the city. At least we offer that to everyone. Most folks take us up on that. I can't tell you what how to plot the graph for the reasons. There's a mix. We know that there were a number of officers over the last 5 years who have simply retired or left law enforcement altogether. We know that some have taken lateral jobs in other agencies. We know that some of those folks made moves to be closer to family, either their own family or their spouse's family or both. So the reasons are as individual as the people who leave.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Peralta, you're leaning in? No.
I couldn't, but I could. Jeff, you were just describing the compensation increases for part of the workforce, and it sounded like those were in the 5 to 6 to 7% range for the PDs. How does that carry out through the entirety of the workforce? Say in the last couple of years, whatever time frame you care to give it, how have we kept up with compensation?
So we typically, so the council, I think about 3.5 or 4 years ago, adopted a new class and comp plan, which increased the number of ranges and the steps in the ranges. The result was that a lot of our senior employees who had been topped out for years are now eligible for step increases. For non-represented employees, we typically budget a cost of living adjustment that's based on the February CPI numbers. The last 2 years, we held that number, I think, to 4% each year, which was lower than CPI in both cases.
So 4%.
We had a 3.2 and a 4% each of the last 2 years.
Those were below CPI.
3.2 was a little below and the 4 was definitely below. I think CPI was 6.1 or.
And that was for the city's classified staff.
That was all non-union staff.
And then on the revenue side, Budget Committee Member Hart talked about the cap in the rate of increase in taxes under Measure 5 and 50, but can you kind of share with the committee a little bit about how that constrains the growth of the city budget? Because what I'm concerned about is something that we've had throughout my entire tenure, where the 5 and 50 will cap growth at 3%. But then on the cost side, you have compensation increases, healthcare increases, and staffing is the biggest overall share of the budget, right? What,
For the general fund, for sure, yes.
70% of the general fund or something?
Ish, maybe more.
So on the staffing side, just through normal drivers of cost, rate of, compensation, COLAs, healthcare, et cetera, that rate's increasing typically by a higher rate than that 3%. I'm just trying to get a sense of why we find ourselves in this position
Sure.
consistently.
So there's a little bit of information in the staff report that goes into that. Let me try to pick out a couple of the highlights. Oregon's property tax system is among the most complicated in the country. I'll just say that. We have a tax limitation that limits the growth in taxable value and also limits the growth in taxes assessed on properties. In the olden days, a city like McMinnville would have what's called a tax base, and the tax base could be increased by up to 6% a year, which is the amount of money you would gather from levying the tax. That is no longer the case when measures 47 and 50 were enacted by the voters. Those tax bases and any existing operating levies were rolled together into what's called a permanent rate. So there's no longer any ability to change that permanent rate. Our permanent rate is $5.02 per thousand of assessed value. So the only way tax revenue will go up is with the creation of more assessed value. And the growth of that assessed value is capped at 3% a year. New construction can add to that. But what's also complicated is that when new construction comes on the market, there's a difference between real market value and taxable value. And what happens is that the taxable value of new property is depressed by that gap that exists between taxable and market value. So a house that's brand new is very rarely taxed at the real market value. It's something less than that. And I'll just give you a specific example. A house that was purchased in McMinnville for $419,000 8 years ago, just in the last tax year, became assessed at near that purchase price because it was depressed at less than that. And that number grew by no more than 3% a year. And I can tell you that story because it's my house. So we lived in the house for 8 years, and this is the first year that we have paid taxes about equal to what the purchase price of the house was 8 years ago. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That was a really great explanation of those limitations. So then compounding this from what I'm hearing you say, the way to increase tax revenues without raising taxes would be to increase the number of houses, increase the number of businesses and whatever. But over the last 20 years or so, that really hasn't happened here, right? To any significant extent. I remember 2002, I think our population was 28,000 and it's 34,000, 36?
Or 500 last time.
Yeah, the community grew substantially in population between 1990 and 2010. Since 2010, things have really flattened out substantially. I think that historically we were in that 20-year period, we were probably building between, I don't know, save between 300 and 500 houses a year for some of those years. To provide for the forecast growth that the state establishes for McMinnville, we would need to generate about 225-ish new home permits a year. I think we've hit that mark once maybe in the last 10 or 15 years.
But we have in the last few years added a bunch more. Thank you for the indulgence, Mayor. We've added a lot more land to the potential inventory.
Yes, and we've started to entitle that land. We've gone through the area planning for a couple of chunks of that land. It will be, we may see the first houses going up in the Fox Ridge Road area in another 2 construction seasons. For the next area, kind of on the southwest corner of the city, we're probably at least 3 years, maybe 5 years out from seeing any significant construction happen.
So in your estimates, do you estimate us getting over like 220, 250 units in the next few years?
Not for the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
We're gonna go to Counselor Menke next. I wanted to add one thing on the Measure 50. Before it capped annual growth at 3%, it first rolled back the assessed value 10%. So started even from a deficit. And other than adding lands and new construction would be that there are lots of properties in the city on which tax is not levied. And one great example of that would be the volume of both county and city properties that are around our high value downtown. So in multiple blocks of courthouse, jail, county buildings, et cetera, those are all tax exempt here as well. So there could be future efficiencies as well of in liberating some of that land for redevelopment and consolidating efforts. Counselor Menke?
I just wanted to address one thing that you brought up. We were talking about so many policemen leaving the force and things like that. And my recollection is that a great deal of this happened sort of during the COVID time and the defund the police. My question to you is, have we seen that drop off in the last few years, or does it continue?
It's been, so we moved in fits and starts. We were down as low as 3 vacancies. I think we're back to 7. So the low point was about 2 years ago when we had 9 vacancies, and we'd hire 2 people, lose 1, hire 2 people, lose 1. It sort of felt like that for a while. And again, driven at least in the last 2 or 3 years, mostly by retirements, we're still navigating, I think, 7 vacancies. Vicki had just sent out an HR report to the council earlier today, and it's in your inbox if you haven't read it. But I think that's what the number is right now.
But retirements are kind of to be expected. I mean, we do have kind of an aging group. Okay. So, I mean, people are not leaving just because they feel attacked as policemen.
I think it's always been a hard profession. It's a dangerous profession, even in a small community. I think that in a community like McMinnville, where we have been by and large very supportive of law enforcement, I think that's probably less of an issue for our officers. Other departments have seen significant flight over the last several years. And again, we know that a number of officers left this organization to pursue careers outside law enforcement. So it's definitely been a factor.
Okay, I just kind of wanted to question that a little bit. I also wanted to comment on the building boom between 1990 and 2010, and then the drop off, obviously, because of the 2008 debacle, so to speak. But I also wanted to comment on the fact that even if we increase the amount of building and things like that, our SDCs are quite low, and they don't really necessarily cover the cost to do our city improvements as we go ahead and build and things like that. So we have to take that into consideration also. A great building boom would be wonderful, but it's not going to cover the city's costs. And that's something we should know. unless we increase the SDCs. And we've kind of skirted around that. We do have at least a cost of living increase every year on them, I believe, but it's something to consider as we go forward. Also, just as a comment on the urban growth boundary and stuff, we have a lot of lots in the urban growth boundary that have chosen, I mean, these are farmers, 10-acre, 5-acre, 3-acre, have chosen they not to develop. And they cannot be forced to develop. We can't condemn them or do anything like that. The only way they might be forced to develop is if they're completely surrounded on all sides with development. And then it's kind of a hard one for them to stay out of being developed. So that is another thing, even though we've brought a lot of land into the UGB, much of it is not developed out of choice of the landowners. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Towery, do you mind, just as a continuation of the police discussions, talking about, so we've been talking about staffing levels, but we haven't been talking about how the PD has been funded in terms of number of positions requested, number of positions funded, et cetera. And given the nature of the budget meeting, I just want to make sure that there's clarity around how much we've funded versus, but just to address the financial the potential financial implications that are trying to be withdrawn from that.
Yes, so let me just dig for a second. I think I've got something on my computer that will actually add a little bit more substance. I do know that over the last dozen years or so, we have added uniformed positions in the police department, and that has not necessarily been the case for a number of our departments. Hold on a second.
To build on that question, Jeff, can you speak to if any of these budget assumptions in the years ahead are counting on some sort of vacancy savings in the PD, like we have relied on in the past?
I don't, Crystal. So what did you do in terms of assumptions?
So it's built off of the 24-25 budget, which does have 3 police.
Okay, so we had, again, 7 or 8 vacancies when we built the budget last year. We didn't eliminate any positions, but we assumed that we weren't going to fill all those positions. That was based on feedback we got from both HR and the police department. And so we didn't budget enough to fill all of the positions, the equivalent of about 3 positions we assumed we would not be able to fill. History has sort of proved that out. And so because we still are carrying 7 vacancies right now, these assumptions assume that we would only fill 4 of those. We also committed that we would be willing to use reserve to fill those positions if we had enough applicants to fill. So we didn't freeze the hiring. We didn't eliminate any positions, but realizing that it was unlikely to fill the positions, it made sense to put the money in reserve as opposed to put it in the police department where it wouldn't get spent and then it would just roll into reserve the next year. Does that make sense? I opened the wrong chart here. Hold on one more second. So going back to about 2012, up until just a couple of years ago, we increased the number of positions in the police department by about 10 FTE. My recollection is that I think 8 of those were uniformed positions. This will be close.
Additional questions? Committee Member Mason?
Mayor, and Jeff.
Could you please talk into your mic, please?
That a shot. Do I understand that the numbers that you have supplied us do not include we had a pretty extensive discussion of capital needs in the budget committee last year. And do I understand that none of that is specifically included in the pro forma figures you've provided us?
No increase beyond what is in the current year's budget. It was pretty nominal. So that there's still a substantial unmet need for capital expenditure, major replacements and reserves. Those are still not addressed in any of these forecasts.
Okay. Just a couple of other comments. When taxation is as restricted as it is here, and I've worked in another state, so I'm used to its own version of the tax restrictions. The tendency as costs go up is to try to utilize user fees as much as you can. And I got the sense that that's here just from my own experiences. Regarding Counselor Menke's comments, almost everybody figures out system development charges or impact fees. And then when you get the actual mathematical calculation, you immediately recognize that the public would just blanch if you did it. And the marginal costs that come from these charges has an ultimate impact on housing costs. So you can solve your problem and create another one of far greater magnitude potentially. And the general, I've looked at it for far too many years, and it just seems like making user fees, trying to come up with the first true marginal cost generation who pays user fees usually winds up in tumult, and the costs just become burdensome beyond reason. So we all fall short, I think, and I think we do so here when we establish system development charges, impact fees, other user fees, because the sense that people's reaction to them just be totally unacceptable. And it strikes me that you don't have in Oregon what we had in Idaho, which was some slippage on the sales tax revenues, because you don't have any sales tax. So I appreciate it every time I go to the cash register. But when I look at the budget, it's one of those things I see missing, and it certainly has an effect.
Is that the conclusion of your?
That's it.
thoughts? Thank you. Counselor Payne, I saw your hand go up.
Thank you. I was just doing a test run to make sure it works. I seem to be having some technology issues today. I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Gary?
Thank you. Only comment I had was just looking in the future, the three models for the next year. My concern is just back to the previous work session where we heard about the operating costs for the future bond facility. So to be protective of, and thanks for the assist on the math, Councilor Garvin, that about 20 cents of the $1.50 in terms of the $1.50 that would be needed to operate that facility at the 614,000 going forward, to reserve that so we can marry the cost and the need if the voters go forward, and I imagine if that makes its way to the ballot in May. A big piece of that conversation that we have is the ability. MacPac paused on the recommendation to allow for us to have the conversations to put financial sustainability in the pocket, so we can have the ability to say we can fund that building appropriately, and this is the tool we can use to do it. And so ensuring that as we go forward, there is a runway that includes that 20 cents of operating cost of that new facility as proposed in 2028, and the onboarding of that facility and startup costs of that facility at the same time as we phase out this facility. So I'm looking for 2028 already.
Sounds like you're running for re-election.
Council President, have anything to add? I mean, pertaining to the budget. Going into Zoom here, I see Chair Maxfield has joined us, Budget Committee Member Ernst, Counselor Chenoweth. Would anyone like to add some comment, have questions? Chair Maxfield, nice to see you.
I have a question for Counselor Geary, following up to what he just said, because I agree with him. I'm looking towards 2028. So I was wondering, are you hoping to not onboard that 20 cents until we are ready to operate that building, or flag 20 cents for that 2028 and maybe use it for capital improvements before then? Just curious.
I'll take this one, Mayor.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
As sort of as I mentioned at the end of my comment about the ability to onboard the new facility, we've talked about one of the goals of MacPac was no day without a active pool, no day without a facility. So to keep that open means we would have to fully staff operate and manage a building, two buildings in conjunction to hand off opening one and closing the other on consecutive days. So there would need to be some ramp up cost, but yes, I think my goal in looking at the budgets would be to ensure that there is that 20 cents available, so I guess in the 27 budget or however you would phase that in when it's time to start if the voters give us the approval to construct that facility, when the voters give us that approval to construct that facility, to have that in the pocket to save for that, 27 year budget, the 2027 budget to start operating that, or however it works when we start needing to turn the lights on and put chlorine in the water. So it would be to save it for use then and not onboard it until then.
So do you want to use those thoughts to maybe start transitioning our conversation here, unless anyone else wants to add any questions at this time, and we can kind of direct the conversation towards some staff direction, reminding everyone that we're not making any decisions at this meeting at this time. We just need to give staff some general direction so that they can complete preparing the budget to present back to the budget committee in the spring.
Mayor, before we start there, Counselor Chenoweth had two questions. The first one is, how is PERS impacting the budget? And then the second one is, someone expressed that we are limited to 3% plus new builds. What has been the average tax assessed increase of the new builds over the last 3 years?
So, Crystal, is the PERS is in here or no?
PERS increase is not built.
Well, we know the PERS rate for the next biennium, and that was included in the base rate. Crystal, can you look up the PERS combined rate? So we'll look up the PERS rate. I know we saw that rate for the next biennium, and we've got an assumption for the following, so we can give you those numbers. They've been running blended, I'm going to say between 23 and 27%, I think. That's sort of the range that we've been seeing over the last couple of biennia, and I think that continues. Claudia, what was the second part of the question? Oh, the increase in assessments. So in the 8 years that I've been here, I think we have seen our total assessed value increase by as much as 4.2%. I think that was the highest of the 8 years. So we tend to be between 3 and 4%.
The breakout with PERS, the new rates, actually PERS went down 0.5%. And then OPSERP, general service, is going up almost 10.5, and police and fire 10.4.
And that's the percent of increase, but it still runs like low to mid 20% of payroll, right?
Sounds right.
Yes.
Gentlemen, do you want to share your thoughts with the table?
It may just be in sheer design of the general fund projections. But if I'm to look at this as just using it as a scale, so to speak, I have questions when you like, let's go with the first one, for $4.02. I'm not quite following how the orange lines or red lines, depending on how you look at it, correlate to the green and blue, because they seem to grow at a faster rate if I'm looking just at scale.
Sure. So yes, they do. So the orange or red, I can't tell the difference myself.
Burnt orange.
The not green and blue numbers are the surpluses or the deficits based on the operating expenses and the operating revenues that are shown in green and blue, and those accumulate from year to year. So if you have a $500,000 deficit one year and you get another $500,000 deficit the next year, you've got $1 million deficit. So those deficits accumulate. And then just for context, the $4.02 is what we're levying in the current year. So that first chart that's on page 4 of the staff report forecasts what would happen if no additional levy authority was exercised through fiscal year 29. The graph on page 5 assumes an additional 50 cents in the coming fiscal year and for the 3 years thereafter. And the final graph on the last page assumes the full $5.02 levy adopted next year and carrying on through the additional 3 years of forecast.
Counselor Gary?
So just looking at the models for the number 2, like looking at number 2, if we bring it up to rate of 452 per year, I know, looking at that, you talked about the assumptions of capital improvements in there, but in that, in the paragraph, should significant capital investments or maintenance activities occur during any year within this forecast, the forecasting, the budget deficit would become more pronounced without additional funding capacity. What are items on in the near term on the capital improvement plan that could or would hit in that term? Just
the facilities assessment that we did about 5 years ago anticipated the need for anywhere from $2 to $3 million a year for capital improvements supported by the general fund over the next 20 years. We have not hit that $2 million mark in any of the last 4 years. And so to address the deficits in that plan, we're still looking at a number anywhere from $2 to $3 million a year that we would need to fund.
And we haven't hit that number because the need hasn't arisen, or we haven't hit that number because we haven't dedicated the funds to knocking that out?
The latter.
Understood.
Additional, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, those seem to be pretty clear decisions that we've made last several. There's been a collective decision made not to fund the capital improvements and not to do some maintenance items, just to be able to continue to provide the service.
That's correct.
And but for instance, I'm thinking of one like Zach, earmuffs. If MacPac doesn't move forward and we don't get the bond and the roof collapses in finally on the swim center, that would be a forced capital expenditure that would be immediate. Or we'd close the swim center.
Those are a couple of the options, yes.
That's kind of least worst case scenario. I mean, you think about the number of users in that facility and the amount of damage, not just physical damage to the property. I think that very real reality of of that roof falling in, the least worst thing that could happen is that we have to close the facility because the roof fell. Okay, are we now ready to move into some suggestions about how staff should prepare this budget? And if nobody wants to jump in, I'm happy to jump in and take the lead on it and hear other thoughts. I haven't typically done in these meetings, but the cumulative efforts that we've made over the last many years have really been to get the city budget in a place where we are able to operate at the rate at which the citizens expect, which means paying fair wages, so we don't have losses in different departments, which are much more expensive. It has been so that we can start maintaining our facilities, so we're not faced with a building that could have major problems come at it. And I should say that I don't want to imply that the roof could fall in any day, and that I don't mean to scare users of the pool. I'm just saying that we understand that facility is on its way out, or well on its way out. And this, intentional underlevy and the intentional delays in other areas have also been about how we can bring this back on in a kind of consumable way. The intention for me, and in the work that I did on this to bring these budget fixes forward, was always been, of course, that we will be back up to the full taxing authority. And I believe that's what the city needs. I also know that council president worked very hard on this, and one of the things that became very clear through the polling that happened and what we heard from the public was that the public would hear or would prefer that this came back on at a rate of 50 cents per year. And I know that council president repeated that and made, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you pledged to bring it back at 50 cents a year and not above that. And so while I believe that the best thing for the city as an organization at this moment in time is to bring the entire dollar back on, I believe also in accountability, and I want to, of course, back up what council president said and be accountable for those pledges that were made. And so even though, and I apologize to our city teams for not offering up a recommendation that would put you in a surplus and have a budget that you didn't have to think about what not to do. I think that the reasonable and passable budget to prepare is one that adds back the 50 cents per year that we have been talking about doing for the last many years. Do any member want me?
I think everybody in this room knows where I stand on increasing the taxes. We should have done it this year, clear to the $5, so we could do the capital expenditures that we need to bring this city back into a good condition. But I also understand the political ramifications, and I much appreciate what you've done for us, Councilor Garvin. That's phenomenal, what you've been able to convince the city people about. And even though I do believe that it's the best thing to go with the $5 at this point in time, I definitely would support the 50 cents. And as we look at the forecasting that's been going on, one thing that I might ask Jeff and your staff to do is to redo put a fourth graph together that would show the 50 cents this year and the dollar next year into what it does with the cumulative budget surplus deficit. and how that affects, how that grows to be able to do the capital expenditures that we need. A lot of capital kind of gets lost in the fact that a police car is a capital item, but a building is also a capital item. And the buildings just happen to last a lot longer. Problem is, our buildings have not had the maintenance and are in a lot of very poor condition. I'm 2 years or a year ago, I got out there and looked at some of these buildings, and was very much the reason I was pushing for the full increase so we can take care. We talk kind of tongue in cheek about the swimming pool roof. Well, there's a lot of roofs and a lot of buildings, and there's a lot of work that could be done. I would support, again, another 50 cents this year. That would give us a very small cumulative deficit. But if we went with the full $5 in fiscal year 27, then the cumulative budget surplus deficits should start going down and give us some of those funds that we need for the buildings and for the police cars and other things that the city needs, so that not only can we provide the services to the city, but we could take care of our employees, as we've talked about before. And I really do push on is burnout. And I'm hoping that with just another 50 cents, that we can kind of put the burnout a little bit more on the side burner, because it'll never go to the back burner. And I just want to remind everybody that on average, $235 a year. $235 is all we're talking about to fully fund the city operations. Some houses were going to be more. I did my calculation. Yeah, on my house out on the west side, it goes up $280. I'm more than willing, even on my new fixed income that I have, to fund that, even on top of a new swimming pool and library. And I'm sorry to say I don't use either one of them as much as I'd like to, but I think it's very important that we look at the bigger picture and think about the actual dollars and quit talking about incremental things. What does it really cost the end person? That's my opinion. I support whatever we decide to go.
Thank you. Who else would like to add their voice to the conversation? Councilor Gary?
Yeah, I think at this point I would get behind a $4.52 budget, bringing on 50 cents. And I generally think we need a higher level and deserve to provide a higher level of service. And while people don't call up every day and ask our employees and staff if they could be charged more, they do ask for more services in myriad different ways. We have wait lists for our programs. We have calls for service that go waited and unanswered. We have parts of our city, as have been highlighted, that need repair, and all of those are other ways of asking for doing more and providing more and offering more, which onboarding more revenue to do those would accomplish. But I think at this point, the $4.52 budget to incrementally bring that back on per Council President Garvin's hard work out there is the right thing to do and the right place to be, and will continue to set us up for slow success.
Thank you. Chair Maxfield?
I first wanted to apologize for being late to the meeting. I had an online class. But I support moving from an under levy of $1 to an under levy of 50 cents. And so I recommend the financial department prepare a budget with $4.50 per 1,000. And I appreciate all the hard work of our finance department and especially the heavy lifting right now. Thank you.
Thank you. 452. Yes. Committee member Ernst.
Hi, everybody. I also would support the 50-cent under levy. So I just wanted to add that in, and thanks everybody for the thoughts and good questions on the call.
Thank you. Committee member Mason.
I agree.
Thank you, sir. Committee member Hart.
I agree as well. I think it keeps the I don't know if promise is the right word, but it's certainly I feel that it keeps the group as a whole in a place with the taxpayers in McMinnville that we told them that they would be in. I think that the additional 50 cents per year is appropriate, shows appropriate fiscal restraint, but at the same time moves us a little bit further in the direction of being able to properly fund the city and provide for the maintenance and the capital improvements that we've been neglecting for the last few years. So I think this is the way to go.
Thank you. So we've heard from a majority of the members to direct towards a 50-cent under levy. Would anybody like to add anything else before we close? Council President?
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments and sticking to the 50 cents a year that the polling data showed throughout the fire district effort. My question for Jeff and for staff would be what a cost would be to create like a procurement officer for the city that we could get more efficiencies in our purchasing power and also look into each department to find efficiencies and maybe just changing the way we've done things because we've always done them that way and come up with some cost savings there that then our public engagement officer Noel could shoot out that information and say, yeah, we're bringing on 50 cents, but we've also found, $500,000 or whatever that number is and efficiencies and savings. And so we've, can roll that into an ad package to increase service level, but we're not just adding revenue. We're also figuring out where we can be better with the taxpayer dollar.
Yeah, we actually had that centralized purchasing position as one of the core services ads that was not funded. We can pull that number and update it and get that information out.
Okay, thank you.
Committee member Cunningham?
Yeah, I as well support the 50 cents increase in the tax authority. And I did want to just make two comments. One, I wanted one for the public record. Last time we had this meeting, I singled out the library with some increase in their labor costs there. And after looking at it, I misspoke during that conversation. I referenced it as a 1-year increase. And that was actually, in fact, a 3-year increase. So I thank Jenny Berg for guiding me on that one. So I apologize for that. And then the other thing is I guess I was running for office.
That's funny. Thank you, Counselor-elect Cunningham. Any additional comments? Not hearing any, I will close the work session at 6:59 p.m. We will take a 1-minute break and reconvene at 7 p.m. So generous. We can go for 2 minutes, maybe. 2 minutes.
Challenge accepted.
The regular work session will be on a different Zoom. It's on the city website.